Good evening and welcome to HCCLA's Reasonable Doubt. As you know, I'm Carmen Rowe. I'm the president of HCCLA, the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. We're the largest local criminal defense bar in the country. And tonight I'm sitting in for Jimmy Ardwan, who's our regular host for tonight. But I'm here with Damon Parrish, who's also the host. Good evening, Damon.
Good evening to you as well. I'm glad you're here besides Jimmy. You look much better.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, we have a great show, but before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what's going on around Harris County.
All right. So first, we're going to start off with Deputy Trooper Spears. He was posing with a picture for Snoop Dogg, and I don't even believe he knows who Snoop Dogg is. Nevertheless, he took a picture with Snoop Dogg and got in trouble for it.
Yeah, I understand he got in trouble because he was in his DPS uniform. And I don't know if we have a visual, there it is, of Snoop and the officer together. I understand there was another officer in Austin who took a picture with Snoop who didn't get disciplined. And so now the rumor is that it was because he was in uniform. But
maybe.
I would take a picture either way.
I would too, right? It's Snoop Dogg. And then next we have Officer Rosa. And this is actually a sad story. He was involved in the HPD ticketing scam, a scam where the officers were issuing false tickets to people and testifying in court about it. Well, Officer Rosa has been re-indicted or indicted again under an aggravated perjury charge. So I believe they're saying that he testified under oath at trial based off one of those false tickets, and that's what makes it aggravated. Regular perjury is just lying under oath, but when you testify under oath, usually at a trial or a hearing or at a grand jury, that makes it aggravated. So he's been indicted now with aggravated perjury.
Well, and I heard today that they've indicted him for a second charge of aggravated perjury, and so I wonder if how many trials he testified in at the municipal court stage that they're going to turn around and file charges on him for. So.
Good question.
Yeah.
You think eventually they might stop. I mean, one is all you need. But
well, in this case is compounded in its tragic, its tragedy by the death of one of the officers who committed suicide after this investigation started.
Absolutely.
What are these officers looking at as far as punishment if,
Well, if they're found guilty, aggravated perjury is a third-degree felony, I believe. So in Texas, that's a minimum of 2 years in TDC or prison, a maximum of 10 years in TDC or prison, and up to a $10,000 fine. Now, I don't expect them, even if they're found guilty, to go to prison. This is a type of offense that, in my opinion, is a probation offense. Be you officer or be you not. They have no violent priors, obviously, because they're officers. They were servants to the community, so I anticipate if they're found guilty, they will be stripped of their duties, maybe lose their pension, and get the probation they deserve and move on with their life.
Right, and a lot of times that's what happens. And the most important thing for the citizens to be concerned with is that they likely will not be law enforcement officers any longer.
I agree. Since this is a crime of moral turpitude, it's perjury, it involves lying or deceit. I can't see them being an officer, definitely not in Houston, but in the state of Texas as well.
Well, would you like to introduce our guests for us tonight?
Absolutely. So today we have two great guests, and our topic is sexual trafficking in Houston. And to that end, we have Kat French. Thank you. She's with Elijah Rising, president and director of Elijah Rising, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping those out who've either been victim of trafficking and raising awareness about sexual trafficking. And we also have Ann Johnson. She's with the Harris County Assistant District Attorney's Office. Ms. Johnson is one of the only, not one of the only few, part of the group of people that is involved with dealing with sexual trafficking and sexual crimes of that nature in Harris County. So we have two different guests to give us two different viewpoints of how this is going on and how we fight it in Harris County.
Well, ladies, welcome. Thank you for being here. Let's jump right in and talk about sex trafficking. How does somebody get involved in sex trafficking? What types of victims are we looking at here? And I'll start with you, Kat. I know you deal a lot with the ladies on the front line, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. Elijah Rising does a pretty vast and far-reaching outreach program every month. We sent out 100 people with a rescue phone number to cantinas, brothels, the track, hotel rooms. We would do anything to get the phone number into the hands of women. And so yeah, I mean, when you consider, for example, the Dallas Police Department has a law enforcement assisted diversion program where law enforcement actually goes out once a month and does a roundup of women who are in the trade. And over a 2-year study period, they rounded up 14,000 women. And just as an example, of what we're dealing with here, 50% have less than high school education, 59% have children, 37% have attempted suicide. They have between a 60 and 100% higher mortality rate than the standard population. And so really, the women that we're reaching with the rescue phone number represent a complete failure of every institution of our society: education, family, religion, business. Every juncture, every institution could have helped these women and did not.
So how do women get into the sex trade? And just give me an example of what is a common victim, what they look like. I mean, what race are they? Is this a race issue? Is it a class issue? What types of people are we looking at? If you can generalize.
It's an equal opportunity malady or trauma, really. It's kind of a patchwork quilt, though, because the African American girls are usually walking the street, which is the bottom rung of the ladder, the continuum of trafficking. Domestic girls are usually in online prostitution in hotel rooms, and then the Asian girls are in the brothels.
I see.
So, I mean, we as a society, we exploit equally, but in different venues.
And do you see a lot of sex trafficking coming into the DA's office in Harris County? And if so, what do you see?
We do, and Houston is considered a hub of human trafficking, and that's why with District Attorney Anderson, there's now been this commitment to trying to fight human trafficking, recognize the exploitation, and protect victims. And since that started in February of 2013, we've had 575 cases that have come through that we've recognized, not only for the prosecution of exploiters, pimps and johns, but also for the recognition of those who might be brought to our attention on the surface of it as a defendant for prostitution, that we then recognize through further investigation that they're actually a victim of human trafficking. There is no face. You can't, age, race, background, we see all types of victims. But there is a common theme, and that is a vulnerability. Those people that are being exploited, the Children's Assessment Center recognizes that 90% of human trafficking victims were abused as children. And that is not just a shocking statistic for what we're seeing, because unlike what people think, as human trafficking is an international population, the majority are domestic minors. And that's what we're seeing here in Houston and other areas around the nation.
So, and how do you separate or recognize a person who chooses voluntarily to be a prostitute without being forced versus somebody who's being exploited and forced into it? What tips you off?
So first off, the Texas Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force has recognized the average age of entry into prostitution, or the game as it's called on the streets, is 12. And so anyone under the age of 18, if they are being caused by any means to commit prostitution, then they are by statute a victim of human trafficking. For those over the age of 18, there's an element in the law requiring force, threat, fraud, or coercion. And so either we'll have a circumstance where many times public awareness and citizens may recognize that there's a situation that doesn't look right. They may call that national hotline 888-37-37-888, and that will give a tip to law enforcement to go in and do a recovery of an individual. Sometimes we don't find them until sometime after they may have come to court, where we anticipate that they're a defendant for prostitution, that then through the assistance of the defense bar, when a defense attorney recognizes that the circumstances suggest trafficking, that they can then reach out and work with us to try to get that issue resolved.
And what do you do, what happens once these young ladies get into the system? If you can talk a little bit about that. And we've talked about some phone numbers. I mean, what type of assistance is out there if they call these numbers?
We're actually very fortunate in Harris County that you've had the leadership of Judge Mike Anderson and Associate Judge Angela Ellis to start something along with Harris County Probation and the rest of the community called Girls Court, which stands for Growing Independence and Restoring Lives. It's a court within the juvenile system for those under the age of 17 that are lawfully brought into juvenile justice, that they're deferred from a normal track into a type of probation that addresses the human trafficking element.
And let me just stop you and ask, when you say brought in through lawful means,
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So you may have an underage child that's wrapped up in a situation where they're being exploited, but they might also be in possession of marijuana or committing a criminal trespass or failure to ID. And so you may have a charge which meets that delinquency element within the code, and so they may be prosecuted for that charge, but the recognition of that underlying victimization is what triggers the system stepping in, pulling them outside of that normal track and trying to get them the special services that are needed for the type of rehabilitation so that they can succeed. It also allows for a sealing of their record because we want to make sure that this vulnerable population has the support that's needed and is not being saddled with any type of criminal conviction that's going to keep them from being able to have an independent life.
Right. And Kat, I wanted to ask you a similar question. As part of Elijah Rising, I saw that you do van tours as well as street outreach programs, brothel outreach programs. When you are doing a tour and when you have your people with you, what do you look for to recognize somebody that may be exploited versus somebody who you think just may not be?
Well, on the van tours, we don't go out to be voyeuristic and we don't look at people. We look at buildings. And so we go through a very densely populated Asian brothel district. And so we look at the cameras on the outside, a lot of times barbed wire all around. You have to buzz in. And then there's even an interior door that doesn't open unless you're buzzed in. And so what we do on the van tours is we tell all the backstory that we know about every single location that we drive by, including the property owner's name and home address. Because, as I said, failure of many of the institutions of society, property owners are operating with complete impunity. If we were in Sweden, they would be serving mandatory felony-level prison sentence for not doing what could reasonably be expected to stop prostitution from happening on their property.
And let me ask you, Ann, is that something that the DA's office is looking into? I mean, do you think that it's possible to... Should we be including these homeowners and these property owners in our search for justice for these young ladies?
Actually, what we recognize is that public awareness is important, but what's most important is to make sure that the proper authorities are getting involved. And so where there is an increased public awareness and you see a spot that looks to be something that law enforcement should look into, then that 888-3737-888 number is to contact, and 24 hours a day somebody's going to answer that call. And then based on what you're articulating that you're seeing, they will then funnel that call to the appropriate law enforcement agency within Harris County to then go in and respond. And so there are a couple of elements there that are important. First and foremost is everybody's safety, because this is very much organized criminal activity. It's been recognized by the Department of Justice that human trafficking is one of the fastest growing criminal enterprises and often is replacing the drug trade. When we would suggest that it's almost like a layer of an onion, that you have so many different parties that are involved. And so law enforcement first being able to go in and do a recovery and take out those victims and protect them. And then we proceed with those not only lawful investigations but prosecutions where appropriate for those type of criminal actions. And the county attorney's office also proceeds on civil areas where there are nuisance violations or other circumstances. So there are two areas of which you have the ability to bring people to a form of justice, not only criminally but also civilly within the system.
And before I researched this show, when I thought about human trafficking, I thought about Taken. This is for you too, Kat. And I thought about some faraway country where immigrants brought in and kidnapped. Is that a normal storyline for victims here? Are they immigrants brought to the United States, so they're trapped because it's a culture they don't understand in the language? Is it domestic? Is it across? Just as far as back to the victimology of the victim, what do you expect to see or look for there?
And Kat mentioned earlier that you kind of see different groups of folks that seem to be caught up in situations. And there's definitely an international issue in an international population. And it may be cultural pressures or language pressures or an expectation that's put out by exploiters of telling those that are brought to this country that, hey, if you talk to the authorities, you're going to be deported. And that's not the situation. If you talk to the authorities, you'll be treated as an appropriate victim under those circumstances. And while there is an international issue, the majority are domestic, and the majority are domestic children. And they are kids that may be already running away from abusive situations, may have been sexually assaulted since they're young children. And the challenge is they don't know that what's happening to them on the streets is not right. And they're not in a situation where they can be recovered. They're not in school. They're not in a situation where they're being brought to the hospital. They're out on the tracks. They're out on the streets, or they're out on the internet. And that's why the increased education, not only within law enforcement, but within the other communities that might come in contact with those children, are important to notify law enforcement to be able to go in and do that recovery.
And that's a good question. I mean, that I would have is, I'm not a parent, but I wonder, where are the parents for these children? I mean, if we're talking about kids as young as 12 who are under 18, presumably, do you have any interaction with, or do you know what's going on with their families, that they're not
one girl
active?
I know was sold by her mom for meth since she was 3 years old, from age 3 until 6th grade.
Is that here in Houston?
Yeah, it's Houston. Another girl I know is kind of a throwaway girl. She called her mom and said, hey, I'm being trafficked by this truck driver who picked me up in Nebraska and put me to work in Houston. The mom said, hey, I know a way to escape. Go to Walmart and steal a television. You'll get arrested, and then you'll be safe. What the hell kind of advice is that?
Right.
I mean, so we know that a whole generation of throwaway children, that's the domestic side. I mean, I can talk about what I know about the international side, but nobody asked me, but I'll still talk.
Go right ahead.
Well,
presumably there's an element of immigration that goes along with this, that there are individuals who are not citizens of the United States, and I understand that that's a threat that's hung over these individuals, and it's a very persuasive one when they want to stay in the country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all know we're not under any illusions that the border is secure. The border is absolutely permeable. I've been down there with our friends from Blackwater, driving the ATVs up and down the fence lines, these vast 35,000-acre ranches down there. We see guys walking around the border checkpoint with 19 Asian females under the age of 18 years old. And so the Asian females are permeating the Mexican border too. We found minors in cantinas. Every time we go out on outreach, we find a minor in a cantina. And we've called the hotline, 888-373-7888. We have called that hotline every month when we go out on outreach, when we find a minor in a cantina.
And do you find them responsive on the hotline?
We never get a call back.
Okay. Do you wait to see if they come out there? Or, I mean, I guess the idea is to have the police come out and investigate, right?
Yeah, we've tried just about everything, you know. We've tried waiting, we've tried staying in the cantina and calling on the phone, you know. I don't know. This has to be a grassroots effort.
Well, let me ask you this. So when you go to these locations, do you take girls home? I mean, do you take them with you?
No,
do you bring them back?
No. In fact, we've run the data on this. We have empirical evidence. It might be different in the cantinas, but when you give a girl, especially a domestic girl, a rescue phone number, if she will take between 7 and 21 days before she calls the local hotline, her 30-day still out rate is almost 100%. You understand?
I'm sorry, no.
So
what are we talking about?
Okay.
What are these days?
If she takes 7 days to call the rescue hotline, in 30 days she'll still be out. If she goes right away into rescue, then in 30 days she will be back. Do you understand? Yeah. So she has to go get her papers, get her photographs, pack a go bag, and then call, and she'll be out 30 days later. You understand? Still out.
Wow.
Yeah. That's what we're finding.
So also part of your program at Elijah Rising is the Backpage outreach. And Backpage is the internet, Houston Backpage is just like Craigslist, but it seems to be specific towards sex trade. How do you work Backpage when it's just the internet, when it's just a computer? How do you go about doing your duties there?
There's two ways we do it. Number one is we have like a big phone bank, and we just call and text the girls that we find. And I'm going to tell you something. We have to call the girls in New Orleans and Miami because they're going to be here in just a couple days. You know what I mean? So we call girls from all over. We say, hey, when you get here and when you get a bad trick, because everybody gets a bad trick, call this number.
Okay, wait. So are we talking about prostitutes who are coming here? I guess I'm not understanding who you're calling or how that's happening. I'm not following. Do you have contact with?
There's like a vast network of movement all over the United States. In fact, our office used to be a Thai brothel, right? And we're turning the back 1,000 square feet into a museum. One of the exhibits in the museum is a big map of the U.S. And what we've done is followed a handful of girls on Backpage and see where their phone number pings. And then we've taken a thread and gone all over. So it's this vast network all over the U.S. and they circulate back to Houston. The average length of time a girl stays in a city is 2 weeks.
Oh, wow. And so Houston is a hub in the sense that, you know, everybody's going around and coming back.
We're like the Atlanta airport of...
So Ann, what is the law enforcement side for dealing with Backpage and Craigslist and any other social media that is being used to exploit people for sex?
Right, and investigations of recovery can't be grassroots because this is organized criminal activity, and first and foremost, people have to remain safe. Law enforcement is trained in identifying issues, and not only identifying issues, but conducting these investigations. And so you have, as soon as they are contacted, they will work through trying to make a recovery and trying to recover that individual. The other important part of law enforcement locally is to try to prosecute those exploiters in that demand, prosecuting those pimps, prosecuting those Johns, because part of the reason that Houston is a hub where people are rotating through is because the expectation is that business is good here. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to shut down at the district attorney's office is through these prosecutions to tell people you not only don't want to pimp a child or an adult here in Harris County, but you don't want to try to buy one because we are pursuing those prosecutions for not only sexual assaults of children, but regular offenses and misdemeanor court for prostitution.
Well, speaking of prosecution, what if I were guilty of bringing somebody here for sex trafficking, what could I face as far as the punishment range?
There are two statutes in which we have the ability to prosecute. One is what a lot of people think of as human trafficking, which is trafficking of persons, and the other is compelling prostitution. Compelling prostitution has been on the books in Texas since the 70s, and it recognizes that if you are compelling an adult by force, threat, or fraud, you can be prosecuted on a punishment range of 2 to 20 years in prison. If you are compelling a child, that is causing them by any means, then that punishment range is 5 to 99 years or life, and you face a lifetime registration as a sex offender. So Texas has given us great tools to try to shut this down, where we can prosecute these cases, which it is so important to have law enforcement involved, not only to make that recovery, but to put together the evidence in such a way that we can get these cases in front of a jury in Harris County and let them speak to the importance of the issue.
Well, in the Backpage ads, I found out recently that a lot of these girls, for people who don't frequent the Backpage ads, right, or Craigslist or any of the other online or in actual newspapers here in Houston, there's solicitations with photos of young ladies. And so it's my understanding that the photos are taken in like a studio and paid for by pimps, for lack of a better word, and that they'll continue to use those photos because they own them, whether or not they're attached to that young lady or not. Do you see a lot of that? Is that something that you're familiar with? And if so, why can we pursue those, whoever's paying for the advertisements, the studios who take the photos, particularly if these young ladies are underage? I mean...
Exactly. And 10% of those ads on Backpage are for girls under the age of 18, study by Arizona State University. Of the top 15 cities in the recent Backpage study, Houston was #1 in solicitation of online sex. 21.5% of men in Houston between the ages of 18 and 65 have solicited sex online. So we're #1 in that.
Well, let me ask you this, following on the heels of that. Do we tolerate it here in Harris County? Like, why exactly are we a hub? And I know that Devin Anderson's taken a very aggressive stance on it, and that's commendable. But has the lack of an aggressive approach from the DA's office in the past, or police in the past, is that the reason that we're a hub? Why are we, you know, central station here? What's so alluring about Houston?
People have recognized that our location, the fact that we have an I-10 corridor, the fact that we are a very large and very diverse city, and the fact that the Texas Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force recognized back in 2011 that one thing that needed to happen is we needed to have more prosecutions of exploiters, and that's why the leadership of District Attorney Devin Anderson is so important with this commitment, not only within the human trafficking section, but all of the DAs at Harris County are starting to recognize those underlying themes where cases might come to their attention, but there might be a bigger issue, to continue an even further investigation. It's not tolerated. Recently you saw where local law enforcement went out in going after online solicitors of minors, this past week. And so you see this effort from within many of the divisions of the District Attorney's Office to combat this very important underlying issue of the demand for children for sex. The misdemeanor prosecutors who prosecute those Johns who are being picked up by HPD and the Sheriff's Department. Those are all the important key of the entire team commitment from the entire District Attorney's Office to pursue this issue as importantly as we have. And that is making a big difference.
Carmen, we're #1 in Houston because we have the highest percentage of men who buy sex online.
Interesting.
The first week in May, we have the Offshore Technology Conference. 100,000 oil field workers descend upon Houston. What do you think that does to prostitution?
That's interesting. That's absolutely accurate. I know because all of our hotels are filled every year for that here in Houston. So
okay,
exactly.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. Now, how do you separate somebody who's once again prostituting themselves but is voluntary? It's not.
Look, do you subscribe? That's a spurious dichotomy. It's the dichotomy between staying in a burning building and jumping out of the burning building.
And I guess maybe I think that's a valid question, and I'm going to ask it a little differently. How do you know the difference between someone who is a prostitute and doesn't want to be anymore versus someone who's in the sex slave trade? How can we identify one versus the other? I don't know if that was your question, but
yeah,
is that?
It was, but
okay, we do outreach, right? And if I may, just an aside, if a girl can get herself out safely, we don't have to criminalize the girl to get her to a rescue house. Do you understand? And so, yeah, law enforcement should be involved, but if a girl knows how to get herself out, let's give her a ride to the safe house without calling the police, right? I mean, Houston is the 4th largest city, but we have the 6th largest police force. And so do you think that, yeah, if it bleeds, it leads, right? It's not high on their priority list. Give a girl a ride to the safe house. Okay, so we do outreach in the hotel rooms, right? And this is just an example of one young girl came in. She didn't look addicted. She looked, kind of radiant and kind of, composed. And she started telling, well, this is the most thrilling job. It's so exciting. My last customer paid me $200 to kick him in the nuts. And I said, hey, I'd have done it for free, right? And so she said, if you let him talk long enough, you get to the point at which she decided that her body was worth nothing. Do you understand? And so she kept talking, and it turns out she was raped in her own bed at age 9. Her father died at age 11. Her mother's new boyfriend got the mother addicted to crack, put her out on the track. And so essentially in defending her profession, her line of work, she was defending her own mom. Do you understand? So every girl has a story, even if it looks like she wants to be in that line of work.
I guess as playing devil's advocate is I'm a big proponent of free will, and so I do definitely recognize that sex trafficking is a big problem, especially in Houston. And OTC is a big producer of that. I've known that for a while. But I don't want to say that every John is a bad guy. Every person who goes online to find sex is bad, and every woman who's a prostitute is a victim. I mean, we can't say that's for sure, right? I mean, so how do you for sure know one versus the other? How do you for sure know a victim versus somebody who is actually just wants to be a prostitute?
Okay, if you subscribe to the myth of, all the empowerment paradigms, well, the 27-year-old girl who's in the industry working for a high-class escort service, right? And she's putting her kids in private school and, paying her bills, all that. I bet at age 9, when she was raped by her uncle in her bed, that wasn't a choice. Do you understand?
Right.
You understand? So age 27, yeah, let's protect her rights, blah, blah, blah. But age 9, she didn't have any choice in the matter.
So are you advocating that any purchase of sex is itself an example of sex trafficking in one form or the other?
I don't know if I would phrase it just like that. I know that any purchase of sex is the exploitation of vulnerability.
Okay, and I'm just going to let our viewers know at this time that we've reached the 30-minute point, which means that we're taking your calls live. If you have any questions, feel free to call us and ask them on the air or tweet us. We have a Twitter at HCCLA_TV, and we'll answer your questions live on the air as well. So,
and to that end, we actually have a Twitter question for you, Ann, and it is, what is the difference between prostitution and human trafficking?
Certainly, human trafficking is the exploitation of another human being. It can be for labor or it can be for sex, and the majority of what we see is for sex. And so prostitution is going to be the agreeing, the offer, or the purchasing of sex or a sex act in exchange for a fee. And so you actually have both. Within the element of human trafficking, you're going to have prostitution. And to your point of what you are looking at within the statutes, you may have somebody that comes in on a charge of prostitution, but you may notice that they have a black eye, or you may notice as a defense attorney that they'll say, I don't know what to do yet on my plea, I need you to call somebody and ask them. Or you may notice that there's a branding or a tattoo that says somebody's name and property. These are the types of things that we see that suggest that maybe that individual who's brought in on a prostitution charge really has a defense as a victim for human trafficking. And where they have that defense... Or as Kat said,
they're not from Houston.
And they may not be from Houston, they may be transported in, but there still is that element of force, threat, fraud, or coercion for an adult or caused by any means for a child. And so even though they might be picked up by law enforcement as part of that recovery, or initially they appear on the surface to be somebody who's willing to engage in prostitution, it's through the court system and through the collaboration of the defense bar with the state and the prosecution that we can then discover the fact that this is somebody that needs protection. In that circumstance where you have somebody, and I think the point being that the average age of introduction may be 12 that they get into the game. They may have been on the streets. They may not have a high school degree or diploma or GED. And now they may be 18 or 19 and they don't know any other way. And so maybe they are on their own, but this is the lifestyle that they've been brought into at the moment. The fortunate thing is now in Harris County there's a program called Safe Court. And that court is there that even though you may not have a defense as a victim of human trafficking, you now have an alternative court through the district attorney's office with presiding judge Pam Derbyshire and putting together a program in which these individuals can be given that second chance to not have that conviction, that crime of moral turpitude to carry with them, and to be given the type of tools and probation to help them reach their full potential. And that's what we're excited about, is not only making this difference for victims, but making that difference for those that might have gotten into this situation long before and now need the support of those to get out.
And I'd like to, I'm sorry, Damon, I think we have a call coming in. Hello?
Hi. I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. One, and I'm sorry, ma'am, I just don't remember your name, but the lady in the pink hair there, I can tell you're very passionate, and I appreciate that. But you're giving us a lot of information that you seem to have. I'm just wondering where you get this information. You mentioned at one point that there was a 3-year-old that was traded for meth. How do you know that? Did you catch the mother? Was she incarcerated, or did you catch the person that provided the meth for the 3-year-old? But now let me ask a second question for the group. I don't hear anyone talking about young boys that are put into a sex trade. Does it not happen? Is there no market, or are we just ignoring the young boys that might be put into this sex trade business? So I'm going to hang up now and just listen on the air here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your call. Kat, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. He asked about the young lady that you talked about who was sold for meth.
Yeah, I know her. I know her.
Okay, and he was asking how you knew that occurred.
She told me.
Okay, and so she told you that her mother sold her for meth?
Yes.
Okay, and how old was she?
She started at age 3.
Okay.
And now she's, I think, 19.
So this is like self-reporting is what she did with you? Okay.
Yes.
And then I guess to anyone, his second question had to do
with boys. I think it's fair. We've generalized it as
well,
females,
we haven't talked about that. That's a great comment.
It does happen to young men.
It does. And that's why both of these courts that I've mentioned, Girls Court in the juvenile system and Safe Court, while Girls Court is an acronym that is for Growing Independence and Restoring Lives, and the court is there to support females, there is absolutely a track within juvenile justice for young boys. Safe Court is also an option for both men and women. And so it does happen. But right now, the State Department recognizes that just in general, we identify 0.4% of victims in existence. So for every one that you recognize, there are 200 more just like them that we have yet to identify. We do recognize within the system through our work to try to help young men. One of the biggest issues is they don't self-report. They don't self-identify, and that is a significant issue.
Well, can you talk about why that is?
Probably the stigma around it, and there have been situations in which there are obvious fact patterns in which there's something significant that's happened to a young boy, but it seems to be hard for them to disclose and to make an outcry. And so it's important for them to know that what's happening to them as a victim, just like everybody else, is not their fault, and that they're deserving of and entitled to protection, and that those resources are there for them. And so hopefully and we don't just generalize by gender, because it's not only women and men that are victims, but it's also women and men that can be pimps. There is no face to either side of this problem, and hopefully everybody will reach out for support.
Well, and we talked earlier about criminalization, and just to clarify, are you suggesting that criminalization is the way out for a lot of these young people, girls and boys? When you talked about it earlier, and I guess what I'm asking specifically is you brought up the television scenario about taking it to Walmart and being charged with theft, right? I mean, is that something that is a way out for them? Is that what it takes to get out?
I think in some cases, that absent divine intervention or just like knowing the way to get out safely, then you have to criminalize. But I mean, you guys, I've been to so many panel discussions of law enforcement, Precinct 4, and all of these people, and they just go down the line, they just shrug their shoulders and throw up their hand. Nobody can get their mind around this. Look, man, the last town hall meeting I went to up in Precinct 4, they said between I-45 and 290, north of the Beltway, there's 2,000 Asian brothels. 77% of them are not flying any licensure whatsoever. Now, what law enforcement official can get their mind around that? What, are you going to go knock on 2,000 doors?
Well, and that's the issue. I mean, are you saying that no one's doing anything about it? Is that the problem?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, but...
Well, and I don't mean to say absolutely no one. Okay, you're saying that you're calling law enforcement out to these locations and that they're not arriving. They're not arresting anyone. They're not breaking up a party.
You know, I mean, certainly not at the rate that I would prefer. But I want this thing over with. You know what I mean? So we have some mercy, but...
Well, and speaking of devil's advocate, I'm going to ask this question, even though it may come out, a little one-sided. But what about legalization? We talk about legalization of prostitution, like we do with massage parlors and topless clubs, etc. Would that help save our children if we legalized it, to help regulate it, to provide guidelines? Is that something that...
Legalization is an appalling thought. Because if you legalize prostitution, you legalize trafficking. What you have with a legal prostituted woman is a legal pimp behind her. You want to legalize the exploitation of vulnerability? I mean, you defense attorneys are worse off than I thought. Well,
so I guess the argument is, if you legalize it, then you don't have it's out of the dark and into the light. You can have set up to where it's government, not necessarily sponsored, but government watched, in safe facilities, and there is no pimp because there's nobody to watch your back. You're on your own, and that's the thought. So are you of the belief that through that the only way to stop it is arrest, crime, and punishment, and no alternative as far as legalization?
Take Amsterdam as a case study. Amsterdam legalized prostitution. The mayor, Joe, what's his name? Is shutting down the red light district. He's like, hey man, our legalization experiment did not work. Failed experiment. It legalized trafficking, legalized pimp. It did not decrease the violence against the women. It didn't decrease the STDs, and it didn't increase the tax revenue from it either. It's a failed experiment.
So in areas like Vegas, and I've heard from Vegas that there are parts of Vegas that have legalized prostitution. I think I saw it on HBO one time. I don't remember hearing if Vegas is one of the major hubs of sex trafficking, but certainly it's one of the major hubs of vices, gambling and whatnot. So if it has worked in Vegas, would it not work in, let's say, Houston or Arizona or Phoenix?
Who said it worked in Vegas?
I mean, you have it listed as one of the major hubs of sex trafficking, so I'm just guessing that it's not.
Yeah, but you mean legalization is working in Vegas? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if Vegas is a center hub for international travel,
yes,
and vices, meaning gambling, and we know people go to Vegas to gamble and to whatever happens or stays here. So if mantra is vice and sex is a vice, and they have legalized prostitution, and we don't list Vegas as a major hub, does that not stand to reason that maybe the legalization has helped not encourage trafficking in Vegas?
No, it's just helped not. It's just helped no one get caught for it because now it's legal, right? But none of the whole constellation of trauma around prostitution has not been alleviated by legalizing it.
Okay. So you're just saying that being a prostitute of itself is an example of a marker of some sort of hidden trauma from the past.
Exactly.
And legalization or not, that does not cure that trauma.
Exactly.
And Ann, can you talk a little bit about prostitution here in Harris County, how that's handled versus or maybe in combination with sex trafficking?
Absolutely. Prostitution is often the charge in which somebody might be brought to our attention and where we recognize that they are a victim and that there was some external factor into their engaging in prostitution, either by their age or by what's happening with them. Then the case is dismissed. We do not prosecute victims of human trafficking, and those cases are dismissed. For those cases now, as we talked about earlier, Safe Court is an option that's now available through District Attorney Devin Anderson going out and finding a smart prosecution grant that's a solution to this issue, because once we started looking at human trafficking, we started seeing these cases of young women who had said, I've been in the game for some time. They may not legally have that defense at their age, but the circumstances certainly suggested that we needed to do something smarter and different.
And let me just say, to clarify, so Safe Court is the new prostitution court in Harris County.
Correct.
And it's just for or specialized for prostitution cases.
It is.
Okay.
And it's specifically for those misdemeanor cases where the age of the defendant is between 17 and 25. And the important reason is because the district attorney started looking at where are we first catching folks, where are we first having them brought to our attention, where that we can identify and remove them from the situation. We found this area between 19 and 23 that was an elevated first time of risk. And so now Safe Court is being put in place to separate them from that circumstance. Give them the support of probation, give them the encouragement from Judge Pam Derbyshire with recognizing that they're going to make it through this program, through the support of everybody in the court, through the system being there to help them. And then at the end, with successful completion, their cases will be dismissed where they can then seek an expunction. So the goal here is to stop this revolving door of criminal justice that we often see people coming in from a prostitution charge that I know y'all have seen on those felony files where you see case after case after case. And so that's what we're trying to shut down.
Okay, I'm going to take another phone call. Welcome to Reasonable Doubt. You're on the air.
Hi. I have a question for Ann. I'm having trouble with your sounds. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is for Ann. So are you saying that these women that are going through this revolving door, particularly if they've been arrested more than once, that they're not going to jail, that they're not being prosecuted? I'm just confused because from Kat's perspective, where they are all victims, then are we prosecuting victims?
No, we do not prosecute victims. And if there is elements of and evidence of victimization or human trafficking, we do not prosecute them. We dismiss those cases. But what we're saying is we recognize, as you've mentioned, that maybe there's a circumstance where somebody is of an age, where they're at the moment, where they are not being compelled. But it's the only way that they know, and it's the only option that they have, that now we're giving them a second chance through a new program that gives them the opportunity to not have those criminal convictions and get a chance to get things right. So it's two thoughts. One, if you're a victim, you're automatically dismissed, and we do what we can to protect you, and there are many resources available. Even if you're not a victim, there's still the second opportunity for that population between 17 and 25.
So
Excellent.
is there...
I'm sorry. We're going to take one more call. Good evening. You're on Reasonable Doubt.
Hello. Your previous caller touched on what I was thinking. Wouldn't every girl say, yeah, I was victimized? And wouldn't that get around to them? That they should say that they were victims of trafficking.
So what if they say that? They were victimized.
Well, as opposed to being prosecuted for prostitution.
Both. Well, it doesn't have to be either or. I mean, send them to the diversion court on a charge of prostitution. I don't know, but yeah, they're a victim.
One more thing, please. How with the new law with the topless bars that was negotiated by the city? What do you think about that? And this is a good show. Thank you.
Thank you for calling.
The new law with topless bars, which I'm at a loss for. So, and Kat, if you guys know about a new law involving topless bars.
Oh, yes. How about this? How about the 16 strip clubs that got together and donated $1 million a year to the city budget in exchange for exemption from all the codes and ordinances that apply to strip clubs? Is that what he's referring to?
Probably.
What does that do to prostitution in our city?
Right.
Well, so
our city is an official coalition with the feeder league to prostitution.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So here in Houston, I know we have a lot of ICE officers who go out and do the surveillance, and we have storefront. What do you call them? Storefront
Locations, I guess, or
locations where they set up stings
Right.
to try and catch Johns and other people engaged in prostitution. Are those successful? Is that really just a wink and a nod to the notion that we don't tolerate that? Or is it really working?
Look, man, I've been in this line of work since 2007, and I've seen one sting. It netted 64 guys. What they failed to tell us was that it got 3,200 phone calls during the week of the sting. What the heck kind of demand are we talking about here? This is insane. Whoever dreamed our society would...
Well,
what do you think, Ann?
Because I know I've seen more. I've represented guys for more than one sting since '07. So I'm not saying that's not true, Kat. I'm just saying from this side, I know for sure I've had clients from multiple stings. So.
Well, we just had a major sting that was very well publicized on the news, and I think there were half a dozen or more, 20 individuals that were taken into custody.
Oh, it was 64 for the plain sex sting and 12 for the child sex sting, recent. So good, yay, 2 stings, good.
And recently, the Sheriff's Department also did an operation on a reverse sting on the demand side and arrested more than 100 Johns since the start of the year. And so you do see an increased effort. In fact, Sheriff Adrian Garcia has put into place for the Sheriff's Department an increased number of officers in which they can go out and try to target the demand. And so you definitely see an increased effort. But what's important is that these efforts have to be done in such a way that these cases can actually reach the courtroom. And that's why public awareness is important, but also the public support for law enforcement. Because we're on call 24/7 for them. And let me tell you, my phone rings all the time. They are out there, they are making these recoveries, and these are not simple cases where they simply pick somebody up and move on. These are the cases where these officers work through the night and through the next day. Because when you have a child that you recovered, you don't say, it's 8 o'clock, I'm off the clock. These officers work incredibly hard. They are absolutely dedicated to the issue. And they are doing everything that they can in the resources that they do have available. It's an important issue, and it's an important issue that's going to take everybody coming together and seeing where we can pitch in and how we can help.
And so do you find those to be helpful stings? I mean, do they actually curb prostitution, or You know, I know that we're dismissing cases involving young ladies that are and young men who are victims in the course of the prostitution game, if you will. But what about the Johns? I mean, is it working to target them, I guess is the question.
It's absolutely working to target them. And then the future results we'll see as we move forward. But the Texas Human Trafficking Prevention Task Force recognized that one of the things that we needed to do more of was target the demand side, because you can't just solve this issue by helping victims. You have to address all three components. The pimps who are making the money off of them, the Johns who are providing the money, and then the victimization. And that takes many different organizations and facets to pull together.
And I think we have another call. Caller, you're on live. Welcome.
Hi. My question is, what happens to the women that are recovered? And from Kat's perspective, does she see that as I mean, do you see those people come back, or do they, when they're recovered, do they move on and don't do that anymore?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question.
Well, we have 4 beds in the whole Houston area that are dedicated to recovery. The rest of the beds are just shelters.
Well, now, you don't literally mean beds. You mean shelters for recovery or actual...
Yeah, spaces, spots for people.
Right.
So we have, I think, 4 up in College Station that are dedicated to trauma recovery, holistic healing, and reintegration, right? So those guys have a very high success rate. The rest of the women go into the shelters where they're not trafficking specific or prostitution recovery specific. So, I mean, we need, the continuum is so sparse right now. We need the whole of society to shift in this direction.
And I would have to disagree. I think there are a number of organizations that are coming together to provide shelter and treatment and opportunities that are out there. And as to the caller's point, do they get arrested and do they move on? No. They come right back over and over and over again, and that's why we're trying something different. Safe Court is an opportunity to see. This is a Department of Justice Smart Prosecution grant. It's a research-based grant, and the purpose is to find out if Harris County, through the collaboration of public and private resources, can come up with a kind of solution that can stop that revolving door. That's a big challenge, but that's the commitment of the District Attorney, Devin Anderson, to see if we can be smarter about this and make better opportunities for these folks.
And what we're talking about, the details of which would include counseling, resources, support, financial, jobs, child care, things like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. And when you saw District Attorney Devin Anderson announce this commitment, she was standing there with the Children's Assessment Center, the Houston Area Women's Center, the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services representative, the Bridge, countless others who are involved on the ground, engaged in not only this conversation of prostitution, but protecting victims within the community. And all of those folks coming together, that kind of collaboration is the type of commitment that you get from District Attorney Devin Anderson, bringing these folks together to try to come up with the solution. And it's a challenge. That's why it started, and hopefully there will be a good outcome.
Well, is there a correlation between drug abuse and drug usage and being victimized? Is it true that all victims are being forced on drugs and then turned out, or what?
Hey man, if I was having sex with 15 strangers a night, I would be on crack. So trust me.
So is part of the rehab process a drug process, drug rehab as well?
Absolutely, that will be an option and available for folks. And you do see an element of drugs. You see some pimps that will give their girls just enough drugs to keep performing or to stay up. And with that vulnerability, these exploiters, these pimps, they are master manipulators in finding what's the hook. Is the hook giving them a puppy to stay with them? Is the hook telling them that they're going to do something to their child? Is the hook saying, I'm really your boyfriend and I love you? So whatever resources needed to support, that's what's going to be provided where we can.
And I know we have just a few minutes left. We'll take probably our last call. Welcome, caller. You're live.
Hi. I'm sorry. I just got in now on the show, and I love it. It's great. The question I had is, specifically here in Houston, the sex trafficking industry is a major problem. And, it is rumored that there are nightclubs, specifically strip clubs, donating money to the city of Houston in lieu of, what's the word I'm looking for, to be, not be to get into trouble with the law. Basically, to pay the law to keep away, and that money was supposed to go to help girls and beds for aftercare. I'm just curious as to why aren't there some sort of trail of where this money has gone, and why aren't girls being better helped with that money that was donated from nightclubs to the city of Houston?
That's a great question. Thank you for calling in and watching. Kat, do you want to take that one?
Well, indeed, you know, I'm naive and I'm just a nonprofit. So to me, $1 million is a lot of money.
It is to me too. So.
It seems like we could help a lot of girls with $1 million. So, I mean, how much does it cost to build a shelter?
Well, let's back up. I mean, what is she talking about?
She's talking about I almost said their names. The guys that did the coalition of 16 strip clubs said they'd give $1 million to the city of Houston in exchange for exemption from the codes and ordinances. And the city of Houston said yes, with the provision that that money would go to help trafficked girls. And so I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I'm just wondering, where is the money? Where is the safe house? Where are the programs that money, where's the John School? That money could pay for John School.
So it's like the Flax Garden, the hen house.
Yeah.
We have a question on Twitter that I thought was a good question to ask you. It is to you, Kat, I think, because you've been very vocal about this. Is it all paternalistic or misogynistic to state that a woman does not have the right to choose what to do with her body?
What? Wait, what?
I'm saying it's a big question, so I'm going to say it again. Is it all paternalistic or misogynistic to state that a woman doesn't have the right to choose what to do with her body?
Oh, you mean like, do I subscribe, like the victimization paradigm? Right?
Maybe, or are we? I guess if I could simplify what the Twitter question is saying, are we saying that women can't decide what to do with their body? That by saying they're all victims and it all traces back to something?
Well, I mean, our society has said you have 18 years old is the age of consent, right? And so if a woman is not consenting to what happens to her body, I mean, are you saying that a 4-year-old girl has consented to being raped by her stepdad? Is that what the Twitter person is saying? I don't understand.
I think we're running out of time on this one. I'm not sure they're saying that.
Tell that Twitter person to email me personally.
Here we go, Twitter. Send it in personally.
Well, I think we have about a minute left. So I want to thank you ladies for being here.
Sorry for blathering. I don't mean to blather.
It's all right. So thank you guys for coming. We had a great time. This is HCCLA Reasonable Doubt. Today we have Carmen Rowe and myself, Damon Parrish. We bid you guys a good night. We thank you for tuning in, and feel free to watch us next week. Don't forget to call and tweet with your questions and answers. Thank you.